This is the debut of the next generation of body-on-frame luxury from Lexus. With no Land Cruiser twin, this Lexus soldiers on alone, and now with more Lexus-ness than ever. So let's grab the keys and see if it does the Land Cruiser part just as well as the Lexus part. This SUV is exciting because it is the first time that we're seeing the new chassis architecture for Lexus. Underneath the skin here we have the TNGA-F body-on-frame chassis architecture that debuted in the Toyota vehicles like the new Tundra and the Sequoia. But here, it's under something special, a Lexus LX. And not just a Lexus LX, but the LX600 Ultra Luxury. And we'll cover the Ultra Lux part of this thing when we talk interior, and trust me, there's a lot to talk about. But what we're going to do now is see if it can do the Lexus bit on the street, and then we're going to head to Road America and see if it can do the Land Cruiser part on the trails. The new frame underneath isn't even the end of the story because it importantly drops 400 pounds of weight from the previous generation. It also uses aluminum doors, hood, trunk, etc. This is incredibly rare for a new car to lose weight. And the result is something that feels more agile than ever. Of course, that's a relative term when you're talking about a truck-based SUV that still weighs about 6,000 pounds. The lower weight is actually really noticeable in tandem with the bigger power and torque figures made from the new 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6, making its way into seemingly everything at Toyota Lexus these days. In this LX600, it makes 409 horsepower and 479 pound-feet. So the question Lexus purists will be asking themselves is, do you miss the V8? And it's a tough question to answer because this engine makes more power, it makes more torque, and it gets significantly better fuel economy. The EPA rates this thing at about 19 mpg combined, but in our week of testing, including idle time for filming B-roll and all that sort of thing, we've been getting just over 17, so that's probably pretty spot on. However, there's two things that I miss about not having a V8 here. One, of course, being the sound, and second, it's kind of the simplicity of a naturally aspirated big V8 engine. Sure, the turbo unit is more complex, but there's a lot of benefits. And if the engine wasn't going to be complex, the rest of the stuff would be, so it might as well. You have the 10-speed direct shift automatic transmission, it's reasonably quick when it's left to its own devices, but the second that you put it in manual mode and you request a gear, make sure that you plan that about a week in advance. From there, the power goes to the full-time four-wheel drive system with a high and a low range, of course, and we'll get to that on the off-road course, along with the center-locking diff. One more thing about the transmission is that it's not quite as smooth as I would expect for a $130,000 Lexus. Under load, it shifts pretty hard, and under hard braking, it slam shifts into second as you approach a stop. But it's all made up for by the ride, right? Kinda. It's pretty floaty and soft, as I'd expect from a uber luxury SUV, but this is still a ladder frame chassis, and it still has a solid rear axle, so you do get some jitteriness and some shudders from that rear over smaller road imperfections. It actually seems to deal with bigger bumps better than it does smaller bumps. You know those tar strips that you see on the highway? You feel most all of those. Also, the suspension isn't what you think. It's not an air suspension, but a coil and spring setup with hydraulic actuators that control rebound rates and ride heights. This also allows the truck to raise and lower a lot faster than an air suspension. So, on the road, it does the luxury thing pretty well. There's a couple niggles here and there, but those are mostly under serious load and will probably be sorted out with mild programming. And the reality is most of the buyers of this thing aren't going to be beating on it in the way that we do to test this thing at its limits. So, with the on-road manners handled, let's talk about how it does on the trails. So you might be asking yourself, Matt, why, oh why, would you be bringing a $130,000 Lexus RX out onto an off-road course where it could get dinged or scratched or pop a tire? And that's a good question. The answer is because, well, with there not being a Land Cruiser available in the United States anymore, this is it. This is, if you want a Toyota Lexus product that is the biggest body-on-frame based off-roader SUV, this is it. This is what you get. And sure, this is the ultra luxury trim, so this isn't exactly its main home out here, but that's not to say that it can't do it. So that's what we want to find out. That's what we want to see if it's possible. Now, of course, the Land Cruiser and of course the LX by extension has a super rich heritage of being a super dependable off-roader. Now, of course, historically, it's been that naturally aspirated V8, but it's still body on frame. It's still a really more than capable off-roader. So for this new generation with the new 3.5 twin turbo V6, has it lost any of that luster? That's what we're here to find out. Getting through the forest is about traction, control, agility, and a good spotter. And even with street tires and only a center locking diff, this thing never lost traction. It's easy to be precise with the power. This thing is huge. Not too big for this trail. Thanking my lucky stars, the multi-terrain monitor has a bunch of angles and the resolution is pretty good. This LX also has something similar to the trail turn assist from the Bronco, but I didn't need that today because the turning radius was very good. Whew, okay, so we made it through the forest. All right, so we just finished the forest and there was a couple kind of sketchy, not sketchy places, but this thing is definitely big, it's wide. It did a surprisingly good job getting through the trees. I didn't really have to reverse or do any multi-point turns, so it's actually a lot more agile than I thought it would be. What we're going to do now, though, is the hills, of course. So we're going to keep an eye on our pitch and roll, what angle we're at, and keeping our approach and departure angles in mind. Of course, we are still in 4 low. We still have multi-terrain select auto on. We have our multi-terrain monitor on. And we have our center differential locked. The nice thing about this screen is it'll tell you, it won't tell you the exact number, but it gives you a little gyroscopic readout of what angle you're at. With these, of course, the things that matter are clearances. Ground clearance is 8.9 inches with the 22-inch wheels, but the hydraulic suspension can add another 7. Approach angle is 25 degrees, breakover is 23, and departure is 20 degrees. So, I gotta be totally honest, I'm a little nervous about this one because this is a pretty steep hill, and I don't want to bash the front of this thing. It's going to get up this thing no problem, but coming down is going to be the thing. And also, I don't have my surround monitor on, so now I have multi-terrain monitor on. I can see myself cresting the hill. We have crested the hill. Did not bottom out. We bottomed out in the Raptor, we bottomed out in the Frontier. This, with the air suspension at full tilt, is no problem. So I'm going to put crawl back on, because this thing is going to hold me and keep me really slow coming down. Oh my God. We are at a crazy angle right now. I don't know about this. I'm going to back out of this, because I like Jen, our Toyota rep, a lot. She's really cool, and I really don't want to hit the front of this grill on here. I think we probably would have been okay, but just for safety reasons, I don't have Polo here, so I am going to just back out of this. We're very close to the edges here. Nerves! Nerves! Okay. Okay. Whew. This thing is a champ. It just loves to be out here. It is not missing a beat. Pretty steep, pretty steep. Okay, that's just a rock, that's fine. Now we've got that power, the torque of the turbocharger stopped basically, coming straight up the hill. All right, so we've crested again, not bottomed out. We've bottomed out in so many other trucks out here. You guys have seen the videos. So we're gonna hit crawl control, downhill assist. We are on the lowest setting. Oh boy. Oh, it's steep. Oh, it's steep. Okay, now my foot is completely off the brake now. It's just the car working. And I'm at a really uncomfortable angle to not have my foot on the brake. But look at this, it's doing just fine. Basically look backwards, I'm looking straight up. Look forward, I'm looking straight down. But this is really nice because I can totally control my line. Okay, so locking up a little bit here. That's okay. Multi-terrain select is working. Hill descent is working. Really slow and manageable pace. This is fantastic. You have to trust the system. It's here for a reason. It's been tried and tested. I trust Toyota Lexus to have brought a good and reliable system. So this worked really well. I'm at the bottom of the hill here, so I'm going to turn this off. So, of course, what we're going to do now is go through the moguls. You guys, again, have been on the channel before. You've seen this. These have been packed down from, of course, none other than Paulo and myself. So we're just going to go through here, keeping an eye on our tolerances, make sure we're not curbing any wheels, and we're going to be just fine. I have no doubt about this. Multi-terrain select is in auto, so it's constantly reading the terrain, the wheel speed. It's sensing if it needs to send any traction, any different direction. It's working really just fine. The best compliment that you can give a vehicle to go through the moguls is uneventful. And that was uneventful. So, good job, Lexus. This is where the hydraulic suspension system comes into its own with enhanced wheel travel, so you don't need disconnecting sway bars. Also, multi-terrain select in auto controls traction, and easy peasy, we get through no problem. And then from an exterior perspective, some might consider it to be a little polarizing, but it's nothing if not characteristically Lexus. The grille is in your traditional shape, but rather than having kind of a mesh kind of F-Sport style grille, you have these dual chrome bars. It's supposed to make it feel a little bit more elegant. Of course, they're accented by these really sharp LED running lights, and you have these triple beam LEDs that are fantastically bright. My favorite thing probably from the front fascia is the paint. You've got this nice metallic flake in there if we ever got sun here in Wisconsin, but you'd be able to see it that way. Around the side here you have these 22-inch wheels, and they are huge, and they're actually, okay, so a lot of this being the ultra luxury trim gets very Gatsby-esque design elements, the dual chrome bar, the big 22-inch chrome wheels with the dual spokes. It is a bit fancy, and I think it fits the personality of this trim. Would I prefer an F-Sport look? Probably, but that's just me. Around the side here we have integrated running boards, which I've been making some comparisons back and forth to the Grand Wagoneer that we just got out of, and the way that they integrated the running boards to that vehicle I think works a lot better. They would fold away so you wouldn't even be able to tell that they're there when they're not being used, and then when you open the door they deploy for you. On a $130,000 vehicle, I would kind of expect something like that. This is plasticky, it looks a little bit cheap. Of course, you've got chrome door handles over here. Very typical and traditional boxy SUV shape overall. Around the back, you've got these wraparound LED taillights. They're the Lexus Ls, again, kind of like the front, but you have an LED that goes across the entire width of the trunk. You've got your Lexus script, LX400 badge, and then kind of fake exhaust, although not really. You do have a single exhaust out the back left, but let's step inside and see how ultra luxe this really is. Okay, so jumping into the interior, we're going to do things a little bit differently than we normally would. We're going to go front to back, and we're going to talk pros and cons. We're going to start with the cons here on the front seat. First, you don't have massage seats on the front seat here. The passenger seat kind of vibrates along as you're driving around, as if to suggest that it's not quite securely fastened to the floor or something to that effect. Your sunroof is a normal size. It's not pano. It only goes about as far back as the headrest, and it's got a manual shade. The digital cluster bezel is big. It's there. You have analog dials for your engine oil temperature, your battery voltage, and your fuel. That should just be fully digital cluster, I would think. No wireless charging up here. The big infotainment screen is good. It's running the latest software that we saw in the Lexus NX that we really liked, but it's really, really widescreen, and it does use wireless Apple CarPlay, which again is nice, but to use the Now Playing function for Spotify, I have to reach over, and we all know that this is not a Lexus specific problem, but every time you hit that Now Playing little play button on that top right corner, it never does it right away, so you have to hit it again, and it's just really far because the screen is so large. And then there were 2 days that I would go out to this thing, drive it first thing in the morning, and it wouldn't play the volume. The information was populating, the song was populating, it said it was playing on my phone, it said it was playing on the screen, but no volume came out, so that was a little bit weird. And then there's a secondary screen below it. It's got stuff like your HVAC controls, your car information, and then some settings. It's really nice for on-road. It has your gyroscope and some important information there, but on the road I almost never use it. The autopilot suite is decent. I liked it better in the NX. I don't know if it was a unibody versus body on frame thing, but it worked better there. The steering wheel is just a little bit busy in the lane, so it just needs a little bit more sussing out, I think. But with those things covered, let's talk about some of the pros here. Below anything that's a Bentley, a Rolls-Royce, or a Maybach, I challenge you to find something that has better interior materials than this Lexus. The leather is fantastically supple. The wood has a nice open pore that you can feel. The stitching pattern is gorgeous. It's kind of like this waterfall or wave pattern. And then the speaker covers are cool. The Mark Levinson it's a decent system, but this covers themselves are really interesting. You've got heated wood steering wheel. It's kind of like wood inlaid into leather, which is really nice. And it somehow manages to heat the entire thing, which is really impressive. The HUD, the head-up display, is huge. It's bright. It has so much information. You've got wireless CarPlay, like I mentioned. And then the cameras, especially during the off-roading portion, you could see that the cameras are actually pretty good, which makes me wonder why they can't get better reversing cameras in some of the Toyotas and even some other Lexuses. And then you do have a cool box here. It doesn't get quite as cold as the Grand Wagoneer, but it's still kind of nice. Okay, so this is the ultra luxury LX600, right? So it should be something like Mercedes S-Class, Maybach, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, that sort of thing, or that experience, especially back here because you have this executive rear seating package. This seat behind the driver does not move forward or back. You have this much legroom depending on how much or how tall the driver is. You don't get to move. You can adjust the heating, the cooling, the massage on this. You can't get massage in the front, remember? And you can recline this thing, but you can't move it forward or back to give yourself more legroom. Of course, this seat is a little bit nicer. You can give yourself more or less legroom. And you have this little like ottoman thing that folds down out of the back of the passenger seat, but even still, it's just cramped in here. You have more space in an S-Class or any full-size luxury sedan. Now, of course, you do get nice things back here. You have a wireless charging pad here. You have this screen to control all of your stuff here, but it's all wrapped in piano black. It's like you've got two cup holders here. They're fine, but they're really not that spectacular. You have a storage area back here, which has some USB charging ports, USB-C I should say, but there's no like cool box here. There's no champagne flute chiller back here. And then down here, again, you have a little cubby, which ergonomically is near impossible to get to. I'm hitting my wrist on this thing that juts out. It's wrapped in piano black. It's gonna get smudges everywhere. The attention to detail just isn't quite what it should be for something bearing the name Ultra Lux. And then when we talk about details, in an S-Class or any sort of like VIP rear seat package, you should get switches that control not just your window, but the shades. You have shades back here, but they're manual, like I'm some sort of peasant. You also don't get a sunroof in the back here. It's just, these are kind of 101 things that I think Lexus just missed, and I don't really understand how they've allowed this to happen. You do get a screen here, and it's reasonably nice. It's got a film to it, so you can only really see it when you're sitting directly in front of it. It doesn't quite have the same functionality. The graphics aren't quite as good as the Grand Wagoneer. It's fine, it's nice to have, I guess, but I can't see myself really using this that much. Okay, and then we get to the trunk, and since you have the executive rear seating package, you lose the third row. So you're automatically down to 4 seats. And then you've got this privacy cover, which is mounted in the middle of the trunk, taking up space. And sure, you can remove it, but that's a hassle. Where's it gonna go? And even still, with it removed, this center console and the storage area comes back into the trunk like a good foot. So it's just not that usable, the space overall. This is the biggest SUV that Lexus sells, and it should be a proper 3-row SUV with huge amounts of space, and it just isn't. I can't help but feel like the Grand Wagoneer made better use of the interior space. So with that, I think it's very nice in some aspects, and I think it misses pretty big in other aspects. So that's probably a good time to get into the final thoughts. So there's the new Lexus LX600 in Ultra Lux. After a few days to think about it, I think the Ultra Lux trim actually does a disservice to this SUV. A more standard trim with all the amenities in the front row would solve almost all the issues I had with this LX. So save your money, get a little bit lower trim, because that's where the LX really starts to make a lot of sense. Thanks so much for watching, we'll see you in the next one.